I guess first of all, welcome to this very exciting panel discussion from Spark to Flame, learning design from an evidence base. And I don't know about the rest of you, but it seems like the term evidence has become a more popular one. I think in our over the last 10 years, we've seen the TEF in the UK, where universities are required to evidence um, the effect of their teaching. People who want to apply for fellowship to the HEA have to provide evidence of evidence-based practice. Um, and I think perhaps more importantly, it feels like maybe the culture has slightly changed, where I used to go on to Twitter or LinkedIn or go to online learning conferences and find the same old faces, the same old oracular priestly types, um, giving quite sort of qualitative, observational advice. There's more people now I see sharing research articles and sharing hard factual data. However, on the other hand, we shouldn't get too excited because uh, there's also the same problems. I've judged for three different learning technology awards, and most of the ones I see describe their projects in a totally evidence-free manner. Um, a lot of academics, even in education, want to throw smoke around the issue and complicate things or turn it into something ideological. Um, or worse, they want to somehow take these, evidence, take evidential sounding terms like science or brain as just a way to sell another product. And so where do we go? How do we start? How do we proceed? This is what our sextet of experts is going to help us answer. Here's our brilliant group of panelists. First, Carolina Cooper-Tetzel is a senior lecturer in psychology and neuroscience at the University of Glasgow. Helen McKenna is the head of the Interdisciplinary EdTech Lab at Imperial College London. Dave Macalinden is the Associate Director of Instructional Design at Columbia University, also a fellow Oregonian. Valentina Cattane is the Learning Design Director at Imperial College London Business School. Um, Shoshi Ish-Horowicz is the Head of Innovation and Learning at QMUL, and a person who I think reads more than anyone I know. And Eva Kilar um, Magjish is yeah, thank you. I tried to practice beforehand. We'll be we'll be discussing and answering questions. So with that, I'm just going to move into our first question. Get right into a quite meaty one, um, which is like, why aren't we quite there yet? I mean, assuming that we think that we're not there, or assuming that, well, somewhat setting up the question as if we could ever get there, or as if there's like a finite destination, which is maybe a bit unfair. What are the biggest challenges you see that you run into in implementing evidence-based learning approach or learning design? I'll let anyone jump in.
I can start. Hi, my name is Carolina. So I think, mm, so I have been thinking about this for quite a while because I'm at a stage right now where it's not as challenging anymore to implement evidence-based practice because I have been doing it for a while. But I think one challenge that I see when I talk to teachers or colleagues as well is that when we look at research often is a screenshot of a specific scenario and a specific situation. right? And so we can never just take that one screenshot and apply it to a very variable context. It's going to be impossible. So you need probably different screenshots, put them together, and then apply them. And to do that, you need time. So I think the biggest challenge that I can see is time to inform yourself and then to actually think about what are meaningful implementations for my context and what can I manage in that specific year to try out, to do, and to evaluate. I think.
I can pick up from there because I wrote some notes when I knew Leonard was thinking of these kinds of questions, and one of my top one was resourcing, which is that implementing anything new in higher education implies a change, and any kind of change needs resourcing, often in terms of time, in a very time-poor culture, but also in terms of other human resource instructional designers to support this process, products, whatever it might be. I think that's an enormous challenge. The other challenge I'm going to refer, as I might have suggested, to a book, which is Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, is that human beings are very poor at intuitively following evidence-based suggestions. And this is especially the case in my experience of education, in higher education, where instructional design and education is a social science. And if you're not working with social scientists, having to introduce them to the idea of social science evidence is itself possibly not a good use of resource, because it's very complicated and it's not evidence that people might like to see. There are very rarely easy answers to these kinds of questions.
Yeah, I'd leapfrog off of Shoshi's answer really, and just extend that and say sort of is the resourcing and the training needs that come alongside that, and the sense of are we at a position where we're sort of benchmarking well as a profession as well. But yeah, internally, even within your own departments and learning design teams, I think the training needs, so we employ people. They are obviously great at practicing learning design before they get to us, and then they come into a new context as well, where suddenly the rules slightly change, or the emphasis is different. So I think training and giving time to that is really important, and obviously a barrier sometimes to immediacy in getting people there. And I would add, I think that the comment there about context is very true. I mean, in Imperial, I think we have an additional barrier of STEM, and sometimes just asking people to, I think you hit it, Shoshi, like that social science, like actually really bringing that to the fore and saying this is valuable, and you almost you don't want to be, you need to sort of bring it in, but not to the point where people aren't listening to you. So it's very difficult to, I think, get that balance. That's a little bit about context, at least.
Sorry, can I just I don't want to, I want you guys to talk, not me, but could you expand on that? What you mean about, like, you're kind of saying, like, don't take it too far, or don't
Not take it too far. I mean, I really believe we should internally, but I think when we're working, I think it's knowing your audience and looking at what will help in the design, in the practice of learning design. This is not so much about the designers themselves, but once you're in the room designing with the teams, and that itself can, because I think time is a barrier for those we're working with as much as it is for us. And I think, at least in a very heavily STEM context, I think we have to find the right pitching, I suppose is the best way to put it. However, I want my team to be really well informed enough that they can then make those decisions, as well as practicing the learning design, sort of the pitching decisions that you have to make, which is a really, really challenging thing to ask people to do.
Dave politely has his hand up.
At risk of repeating what Helena just said, and that was a great explanation. I think probably the biggest barrier, at least from my point of view as an instructional designer in higher ed, even though you might get nice sounding titles, the power that you actually have is very limited, because as an instructional designer, you really can just make suggestions and recommendations to people who are teaching the class, because your SMEs, your subject matter experts, are generally your faculty. The faculty have, complete power over their course within their program, and there's that hierarchical structure. So cultivating buy-in is a really big barrier. And I think that we need to start we talk about training others in instructional design practices or learning science, evidence-informed stuff. We might need a little training in salesmanship. And we need to start cultivating internally an attitude of trusting people who know this stuff rather than teaching the stuff we know. My kind of background has taught me that we've learned this stuff not to teach other people about it, but to help people do what they need to do, right? So if I was a mechanic and someone brought their car in, I wouldn't tell them everything that I was doing within the car at the level of a mechanic's knowledge. And I think that's where we kind of get a disconnect from faculty who are experts in their field rather than being experts in learning sciences. That's what we're there for. We're there to fix their car, so to speak, so it can run more effectively and efficiently. I think the other thing is that we need better journalism around it, because scientists, unfortunately, as specific as they are about things and precise as they are about things, have a really hard time generalizing ideas for the general public. And people who teach in higher ed as well, because they just don't have the language around it. And I think that journalists have a really hard time with being accurate in their generalizations for the readership. And I think we need to start maybe, I think there's a journalist named Anya Katz, I think her name is. She wrote this book, Anya Kamenetz. She wrote this book called Test. And she does a wonderful job of bringing the art of journalism and the science of education together. We just need more of those. So like buy-in, better literature around it, creating more of a shared cultural understanding of the importance of this stuff, rather than like, oh, we need better research. And then we just need to show them, look how great the research is, because their experience is so anecdotal. It's really hard to actively disabuse them of those notions. A lot of the time, maybe you've run into this, people say, well, the students liked it, therefore it works. Engagement doesn't equal learning. Learning should be freaking hard, right? Like if the students liked it, you really liked it, you might actually have a learning problem, and I'll stop babbling on, but that's kind of how I generally feel about it.
I just to add a point about that, about the journalism, is that Carolina I think can take some credit there as doing some of that herself as a member of the Learning Scientists group, and also author of the book Ace That Test. So she's doing God's work, as the expression goes. Yeah, and okay, I'll let people go. I have another thought, but I'll Eva, you've not said anything yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the hand, but I don't know whether to go.
You can just jump in. Do what you like.
I really kind of resonate with what Dave was saying, kind of about the buy-in, because the buy-in is the crucial kind of thing, and the buy-in at different levels, at the level of institutional, at the level of different colleges and different kind of maybe stakeholders as well. And I think this is the biggest challenge, to get the buy-in, to showcase to the people what is kind of valid, why are we doing it? So actually for me, buy-in ties in also with this kind of very maybe kind of a clear communication. Yep. So how we communicate, how we kind of describe it, maybe kind of getting the buy-in through different kind of measures in a way. And I think this is the biggest kind of challenge for myself. And I can speak from this kind of, Irish perspective of higher university, but also institutional dealing with this kind of, digital learning experiences. But it's about buy-in and communication at the same time. And I think the clarity of communication, transparency of communication, I think this is where we should be kind of heading. And also maybe tapping into the very beginning and having very clear definitions. Yep. Because what I find is sometimes that we say even evidence-based kind of design learning and so on. Now, what does that mean? I think, we have to go back to the definitions, because this is where the buy-in might come from as well. Yep. If we have clear definitions, if we engage with everybody to define different things, probably that's going to be easier to get the buy-in. So I can see that's another kind of challenge. Yep. Clear definitions, communication, transparency behind definitions, and maybe tapping into kind of also strategic thinking. Yep. Probably maybe one of the challenges will be the lack of maybe strategic and forward thinking as well. What is it that we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to achieve it. Yep. So that's for me when it comes down to challenges, Leonard. Thanks.
Amazing. Yeah, and I have to put my hand up, even the way I wrote the brief for this panel discussion. I feel like I didn't define terms, necessarily well, and we're potentially talking about like 3 or 4 different things, and which I think is maybe kind of makes it fun, but so sorry, not sorry. I don't know. Valentina, any thoughts to add?
Yes, I mean, they've said everything that I would have shared for sure, so I can just echo what they mentioned. But just to build a little bit more on that, I like what Eva mentioned in terms of defining what learning design is. And I find it funny that if I look back at my career, actually even my role has always been quite confusing in different institutions, and even within the same institution, moving from one department to the other, I was sometimes looked at as a learning technologist and then learning designer, and no one knew what was the difference, and perhaps not even now that is clear. So it's definitely a bit of work that needs to be done from our side, perhaps to be less obscure in what we do, and still appreciate the importance of evidence without bringing that to the extent of being unclear in what we do. And perhaps also the institution, because obviously we can have that power, that agency, if there is clarity in the institution. And I feel, at least in the institution I worked for, oftentimes there was no clarity as to what learning design was and what the importance was. And so obviously when you go to speak with a subject matter expert, then your agency and power is way less, because your position within the structure is unclear. So just to make a clear example of that, in some institution, within even the same institution, I was sometimes as a learning designer within the teaching and learning family. And in some other departments, I was in the services family. Obviously, that seems a detail. However, that kind of determines what the professional development opportunities are. So whether I'm more involved or less involved in teaching opportunities and all the others that are related to this. And so obviously that has an impact on how I see my profession as well. So my professional identity and the power I have to go and advocate for that evidence. So yeah, I think it's with us, but it's also with the institution, and we need that buy-in from above and that clarity. And then obviously the time, just to echo that element as well, we're always time poor. So to go to development fast, we often miss some of the crucial steps. If you think, for instance, about the diagnostic step, and so it's often you often go straight to design and development without dedicating the right time to collecting part of the evidence, and that is often not what we want as learning designers, but what we're asked to do.
Before we proceed to the next question, I'd like to ask a little bit of a follow-up question, because one of the really interesting things, there's been so many kind of cool, interesting themes that have come up in this discussion so far, but one of the big ones is clarity and how we kind of simplify our communications with our SMEs. And I think about something I heard about Barak Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction book, which I think it was written in the 70s or 80s. I think, Dave, you seem like you might know, but but people say that it was a very influential book at the time, partly because it said everything most people thought already. And it just crystallized what the general understanding of the kind of the research was at the time. and you know, and it's almost like often, you know, this, I think this happens, is that like we're convincing by kind of just articulating something that again people know already. It's almost like Plato's theory of remembering or something, you know. But on the other hand, you know, so there's a lot of power in just trying to articulate what people may perhaps already believe in. However, I guess you know, the kind of the natural response to that is that, you know, sometimes, you know, the evidence is going to point us in like counterintuitive directions, but more, and this is like what I worry about personally, is that where sometimes maybe what the research is pointing to is just that little bit more nuanced than some of the slogans that we thought up, you know. So I think, for example, of, you know, some people like to pick on active learning, you know, for example, where, you know, everybody kind of feels like, oh, active learning is a good idea. And in general, it is, but there's all these, when you really look at the research literature, there's like a lot of nuances to it that just saying active learning is actually sacrificing and maybe potentially inoculating people too. And so maybe, you know, if anyone had any comments about that, about like how far we take simplicity, or sorry, just to give another example, like dual coding, you know, where like we tell people, oh, like dual coding is really important. And then what they take away from that is I make something a bit visual and then I talk over it, then, you know, I've got a good result. When actually like dual coding is a little more complicated than that. And I would probably submit to you that there's been a lot of really terrible like learning design that's happened under the shield of dual coding, or what people thought dual coding was.
Could I make a comment on that real
Yeah.
quick? I think that we kind of have, like, what you're getting at is we have like an is-ought problem. So people think that like, oh, it ought to be this way based on my like surface level understanding, when the reality is much different, right? And that might be a failure on our part to communicate the actual steps of doing that or modeling what it looks like. I think a lot of the time we tell, don't show. And I think that is just a part of the who said that we were often time poor? Was that Valentina? 100% right. So we have to, you know, fill what little time we have, and it's like gas, it expands to fill the space, but there's only so much gas that we can produce. Not to say that we, you know, we're full of gas and wind, but that's the idea, is that like if we overload them, if we give them too much and then have them trying to figure it out for themselves, we're not using our own evidence based practices in order to help the people that we're supposed to help. We're actually doing the opposite. And that's where I think the misconceptions come from, is just a lack of clarity around this is how you actually do this. You know, it's a tricky one, but you have to pick and choose what it is you want them to do. And a lot of that comes from what we don't do in higher ed a lot of the time, which is a needs analysis or a task analysis. We just kind of get a general sense and they're like, here's a blanket of evidence-based instructional practices that you can use. Choose one and I'll help you with that. And it might not align correctly. And you guys can argue with me if you think I'm wrong, but that's my general feeling about it.
That's great. I think Carolina had her hand up first.
No, I think it was Shoshi actually. So
Oh, okay.
that's all right. Go first. That's all right.
I wasn't going to argue at all. I was going to agree. I think I want to get back, because I think Helen expressed it really well when you're talking about the difference between the training, the evidence base that we have to do our jobs, and the evidence base that we pass on to educators. So I think a lot of this comes down to maybe a training need within the field for influencing skills, which is that we need to build our credibility. That's not easy, but kind of you build the credibility so you can say, right, you need to present it in this way. We have the evidence so that we can back this up if challenged, and the evidence will be presented in a way that hopefully will be heard by our audience, whether that's STEM, social scientists, whatever the discipline will be. They will hear things in different ways. But I think there is a difference between, you know, basically what I'm saying is I'm not sure the influence has to come from the evidence. I think the influencing comes from influencing skills. The evidence is our background as to why we want to influence in this way.
Love
Yeah, I
that.
think, yeah. I think my point about, you know, mishandling learning strategies or anything like that is usually my approach is to try to break it down to the mechanism, right? So why is dual coding successful? So why is it beneficial? What exactly are the mechanisms in our cognitions that make it an effective strategy? Because it is the same with retrieval practice or with space practice and so on, right? Because again, if we just look at 100 different research papers, they have all implemented that strategy or tested that those strategies in very different ways with different populations, with different materials and so on. But the thing that the commonality is what actually needs to be extracted, right? So what is the thing that makes dual coding actually effective? So what are the connections between visualization and the word, the text? So what needs to be happening here? And I think if we break it down to those nuances, for teachers, or when I talk to my colleagues as well, it becomes quite clear then all of a sudden, even though it sounds like, oh, that sounds abstract, all of a sudden it becomes something we can actually work with. Like, okay, so if we think about those links between word and figure, this is exactly how we need to do this on that slide, for example, right? And if we think about retrieval practice, we need to think about how to pitch those quiz questions in a way that they can actually retrieve information in an effortful way and so on. So it becomes all of a sudden a strategy that the teacher can, or the lecturer can think about and think about, okay, I'm going to apply my knowledge about the content, about my teacher, my students, and make that strategy work for my specific context. So yeah,
I think Valentina had her hand up, then Helen.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just thinking perhaps I'm a bit of an exception here, but I can't quite recall when I had the luxury of sitting down with a subject matter expert and explaining that to them. They probably, their attention span is generally 2 seconds. So I never had that opportunity to reach that. And I feel oftentimes as a learning designer, we don't have that luxury. And so that is when the influencing skills, but very much also the relationship with the faculty member or subject matter expert comes into play. And it's a bit of a vicious cycle, I feel, because you want to kind of indirectly pass your evidence and knowledge without, lecturing them, because there is also the relationship to keep. At the same time, yeah, it's a really hard balance, I find, between the two, and so yeah, most of the time I didn't have the pleasure, and I kind of have a very dialogic kind of Socratic method. I ask questions and indirectly I go and I take them where I have in mind to take them, but it's never as straightforward. And again, to go back to the previous comment about our role and the agency and the power that we need, I don't feel that the two expertise, meaning designers and subject matter expert, oftentimes are at the same level, or they are perceived at the same level. And so that conversation, which is actually potentially a very interesting conversation about educational research and better approaches to reach the outcome, doesn't happen because of the imbalance, and there is no active listening sometimes from one of the stakeholders. But as I said, I might be the exception, but I find especially learning designers at the start of their career often struggle to be heard in that sense.
Yeah, my old boss used to tell me, don't use the word pedagogy around academics.
Never.
It'll make them feel like you're trying to tell them something.
Yeah.
Okay, Helen, you got the next.
Yeah, sure. And again, I think I'm sort of building on points here really, but I think that idea of skills development within the the industry, in our industry, in our practice, is super important. I think a few have just been mentioned. But I think it's about establishing and really sticking to your approach as well. So I think it doesn't happen you don't have to do it once. So obviously, how do you make sure that our voices are threaded through the co-creation, the process, the approach? And I think that is where you can also bring in, without necessarily, I mean, for example, reviewing storyboards or something like that. It doesn't have to be in the design session, the initial session, but how can we make sure our voices are maintained? And I think, like Valentina said, that's through really curious questions a lot of the time, dialogue. But I think that and I think what we fought really hard for in my department is kind of saying the approach works. It's not always well received at the beginning, and it does take effort to push it forward, if you like. And obviously that's a big part of my job, actually. But I think that it's so important to establish that and make sure that the learning design voice is heard, and we can have iteration, and we can make sure it's through the process as much as at the beginning. In a first conversation, for example, that's where I think we can bring in evidence base as well.
Thank you. I don't know who was first between Dave and Eva. Do you
I think it was Dave. I think it was
Okay.
Dave.
All right, Dave.
I'll wait.
Who mentioned Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow? Who was that?
That was Shoshi.
Shoshi. Yeah, okay. Love that book. I think there's a lot that instructional designers can learn from behavioral economics, not just when it comes to learning, full stop, but when it comes to talking to people and getting them to accept recommendations, right? So I find that it's super helpful. Like when I first started out, I was just constantly trying to explain the science to them, because that's what got me to believe these things, right? I just dug in and obsessed about the science. It's like, oh, this makes total sense. Oh, constructivism is an epistemology, not a pedagogy, and blah, 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 and all this stuff, right? You can't say that to someone who's designing a wealth management course and they're a wealth management expert, right? They don't care. And I think that what we can learn from behavioral economics is framing our recommendations in the interests of the stakeholder, right? So if you can find a common interest, or you can Facebook stalk them or whatever and figure out what they like, and then create concrete examples in something that they already know. I'm not a wealth management expert, so me creating examples of learning strategies in the frame of wealth management is probably not going to be that effective, because I'll probably lose the nuance, and they'll focus on how inaccurate I am in their area of expertise. So I would find something, or just through discovery questions with them about what they like and blah, 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 blah. And then I start formulating these concrete examples around strategies in something that they're interested in. I had a faculty member who is really into jujitsu. I've been doing jujitsu for like the last 5 years, right? I was like, great, perfect. I'm going to make jujitsu analogies to this person, and hopefully it'll cultivate buy-in. And eventually you kind of lead them to the recommendations themselves. And if it comes from them, they're much more likely to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that. There's little things from behavioral economics, I think, that would really, really help us get these recommendations to them. And a lot of that is like framing it in their interests, giving them a sense of ownership over the idea. It's not something that they're using that you gave them. It's something that you guys came up with together. So you get this kind of IKEA effect. I don't know if anyone knows about the IKEA effect. The whole thing is you create this crappy piece of furniture, but you hold more value for it because you had a hand in building it. And that's another cognitive bias. So I could go on about this stuff for a while, and I won't, but that's kind of the thing. If we start with these concrete examples that are rooted in their interests, and then we can ferry that into more nuanced scientific or abstract explanations, which really nails everything together and gives them a sense of, eggheadiness around the idea, which makes everybody feel good.
I can only kind of come in and agree with what just Dave said, because actually I wanted to mention kind of very similar kind of concept. And I guess the discovery questions are great. And kind of that's actually kind of starts with kind of probably establishing a link and a relationship with the SMEs, with the faculty and so on. And this is what always kind of works. But I would like to kind of probably mention as well something that worked really well with my SMEs kind of, and still it works in a way, is templating and showing. We mentioned showing, yep, in a way. But what I found kind of with the SMEs, and I've been working with different faculty, not necessarily academic as well, is templates, giving possibilities in a way, giving building blocks, a suite of choices kind of. But this is where I inform those templates in a way. And sometimes through the discovery questions, if I need to kind of go in deep into kind of theories, underlying kind of principles behind why we're doing this, whether we're doing this and that, I can go kind of deeper into and show some more evidence. But I find kind of working with SMEs, who are mainly time poor kind of, who want to get it done. The faculty never have time sometimes. It's templating as much as possible. Yep. Establishing a relationship, making sure that we work kind of nicely together, establishing a communication channel, but then a bit of templating, a bit of showcasing, boxing maybe slightly people in, but then modeling as well what they're doing. And as Dave said, kind of, and having the final kind of a moment as if kind of it's co-created, it's done maybe by more faculty or the subject matter expert than myself. But that's what worked kind of in a way for me, and a bit of templating along the way actually kind of helped at the level of, I would say, maybe the whole learning experience design, then the content design. So it can come at different stages as well to the whole kind of LXD, I'd say, learning experience design. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. I should also say thanks for all the brilliant comments so far. Such a great group of people, a lot of the familiar names and faces, and a really high quality of insights there. I'd like to be kind of cheeky and ask a question that I didn't give the panelists in advance, but I think, I know that I know you guys are all, you know your stuff. You're in positions of influence in your respective institutions. So far, we've talked about how we, in a sense, sell the evidence, or at least try to make the evidence, make an evidence-based approach happen, in our respective positions. But how do you do that within, with your peers? How do you do it, like when you're leading a team of learning designers? How do you get other learning designers or instructional designers to care about the evidence? How do you get, how do you make that happen? Anyone?
I'll go. And in fact, we're doing this right now, I would say, coming back to sort of shared, having sessions where we actually run each other through design sessions, so that we're practicing, because I think it's often, again, coming back to that idea of how you, for want of a better word, practice it rather than just know it. And so I think what I found is a lot of the designers that I'm working with, that's where they're lacking confidence. For me, the passion is already there, and I think it's just a continuous sharing of knowledge, to be honest, and then setting up specific sessions where either people are demonstrating, kind of living it, and then, yeah, I mean, obviously we share articles and things like that and have great discussions internally, but I think it's about lifting it off the page, so to speak. So I think it's about continuous improvement and sharing knowledge and dedicating time. I think so far this year we've had 3 full days fully immersed in that sort of practice together.
Wow, that's great. I'm sorry, again, I can't tell. I missed who went first. Is it Valentina?
I think I was after. Oh God, I lost. All right, well, I'll go. Yeah, just to build on Helen, definitely show and tell have always been quite successful, also to promote excitement within the team. But like Helen exactly touched on something that generally in this field, you have very passionate people that love learning. And so they are kind of thirsty for knowledge, for evidence, which obviously supports what they do as well. So in that sense, it's not a difficult job because you're already working with people that are very much into that. But I would say, yeah, show and tell, and also informal groups among peers, really, that generally are created without having to follow up much on that. And as a manager, generally, it's good to remind how the evidence, like we said so far, can support their work and making their arguments stronger, rather than just coming across as being suggestion from, gut feeling or, just make up essentially. But yeah, it's an easy job I found so far, because it's a very, as you can see here also from the attendance, so there are people that love learning, clearly.
Shoshi?
I want to partly just quote John in the chat, who said "Well," which made me laugh, and I think is clearly a part of this. But the other one, and I'm not speaking myself here, is I just want to mention Leonie, who I'm sure a lot of us are thinking about right now, who really modelled this, which is with her absolute passion and drive for looking at evidence, for continually challenging herself and her team, really managed to build that culture. So I think it also comes from modeling and living that passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Leonie really was the living example of all this, and she would have been on this panel. I asked her to come. So I don't know how many of you know Leonie, but she passed away about 2 weeks ago from cancer. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Shoshi, or.
Only to echo what Leonard was saying about this would have been the perfect panel for her, because there was no one who knew and championed evidence-based instructional design like her, and also who built a team who were able to continue that work.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a thought for Shoshi and her family and friends, her many friends.
For Leonie.
Oh, sorry. I did that. I did that actually. Weirdly, I did that at her Shiva too. Sorry. But Carolina?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear that. What I wanted to say was just one example of what we did, because we have a very large teaching team here at the School of Psychology and Neuroscience. So I think we have now 40 people on the teaching track. We are massive. And we are all very much one mind when it comes to improving student experience and so on, and evidence-based. So there's very little barriers in that regard. But with a growing team, we have people who have been here for a while, and then we have people who are just joining, and they bring a different kind of energy to the table. And what we did during our summer developments, we do a big summer development day once a year. We have different developments, smaller events, but one big one. And what we did this year was we had kind of a brainstorming session where we identified what are different challenges that you had experienced in your teaching, in your instruction and design and so on this year. And we came up with a huge amount of different kind of things that people wanted to improve or were thinking about or didn't really know the solution to. And then we categorized those different things. And it was basically assessment and feedback was one category. Then it was a category around well-being, belonging. And there was a category about marking. specifically. And what we did then, we divided this into concrete subtasks, and everyone could pick up to three subtasks that they would like to develop and work on. And what happened then, we had then allocated specific people, a group of people of 2 or 3 people, to those different LTS tasks, or learning, teaching, scholarship tasks. And that was their baby. So they did some research together, looked at papers and so on. And it was a very concrete task. It was something like, for example, we provide too much feedback, how can we reduce this, right? So, or we have too many assessments that overlap, how can we reduce this? And it was quite nice because we had combination, like people working together that were not only academics, but also people coming from teaching admin. Because, for example, to implement something like marking and feedback practices, we need to talk to the admin team because they are processing all the grades. And so we had those interdisciplinary, smaller working task groups. And it's quite nice because now the other smaller meetings that we have are always, we always take one of those tasks, and those people present what they found out and what we can do for the department. And it's quite nice and positive. So just to, give one example of what we have done last year.
I was hoping to, if I was better at doing this panelist thing, I don't know why anybody lets me do this, but but I was going to ask about how you balance different kinds of evidence, how you balance like learning analytics against the research evidence, against personalized experience. But I'm aware, Carolina, you need to run soon anyway. And so I think maybe we'll get to the like a fun, like quick round of questions about resources. And if any of the group, basically one book you'd recommend, one article you'd recommend. And I'll just start with Eva first. I'm just picking randomly.
Thanks, Anna. I guess, my recommendation kind of, anyway, something that I want to share. I'm going to put it in the chat anyway. So I was kind of, advocating to because any Leonard, am I right? Kind of, anything kind of. It's nothing
please,
specific.
Yeah.
I always love sharing about, I'd say this kind of maybe more inclusive kind of methods and so on. So I love UXDL honeycomb model from the University of Waterloo. I'm just going to pop the link into the chat. I guess it's one of my favorites kind of in a way to share with everybody, just because it's very holistic and it actually encompasses UDL. It talks about loads of dual coding, loads of things we mentioned even today. So it's very holistic in a way. So definitely, if you haven't seen it, anybody from kind of the audience today, it's one of my favorites. So have a go at that. Probably kind of, I'm still a huge fan of Mayer's principles. So probably when it comes down to the book, I know it's like some people go like, yeah, it's a Bible in a way. I think I would definitely recommend it. I don't have a link, but I can find it in the meantime. So I'd say Mayer's Principles, it's a good book, quite big kind of maybe, but really, really highly recommend it. And that's
Amazing. I want to try to get through these, and I've got actually just now, in fairness to Valentina, I'm just putting this link in now so people don't lose it. Valentina's doing some research. It's a survey for her research at Lancaster. Please do her survey. I'm just going to say that now and interrupt.
Thank you.
Everybody.
It's not
You're
a
welcome.
book. Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll ask Carolina next because I know that she's got to run to another meeting soon. One book, one article.
All right, I'm going to do a very shameless plug and just recommend my own book that, I mean, you have already mentioned it, so I'm going to add the link here. So it's a book, ASTA Test, Student's Guide to Learning Better. So it is tailored to students. However, we have broken down the different learning strategies quite considerably into concrete steps that can help with designing lectures, teaching, and so on as well. Students have read this book and came back and saying, oh, now I know how to do this. I have some more ideas. So it allows for flexibility. So the first kind of chapter we have is all about that the science of learning is flexible, right? So there are different ways on how you can implement this, and there's not one fit all kind of approach. And I tried to find one paper to recommend, and I just couldn't, because there are so many things that in more recent years I have become more and more aware of in my role of program lead for my year 2 students. And I could recommend books on, you know, how to study better and study skills and so on. But I have found that something like signposting and communication with students is really important, and structure is absolutely vital. I have found that community and belonging is key to any kind of learning. So anyone who's uncomfortable will not come to lectures or learn. And one big thing that I'm working quite hard on with my students is time management, actually, because I can give them all the study skills I want. If they can't manage their time, they can't implement the knowledge at all. So yeah, I don't have a paper for you. I have just those bits and elements.
Nice. Okay, who's next? I'm just Shoshi. Have you got?
So I've gone absolutely old school with my book recommendation, which is Biggs' Teaching for Quality Learning at University, what the student does, because that's the one book that most educators, if they've done any pedagogy training at all, will have encountered. And so you'll be speaking the language that they speak if you've read this book. I just think it's kind of foundational, even if it may no longer feel groundbreaking. The article that has had an enormous influence on me, I'm going to put it in the chat as well in a second, is Student Engagement and the Tyranny of Participation by Leslie Gawley, because I found it a very interesting soft science approach of looking at various assumptions that are made about engagement, which, you know, Leonard, you were talking about things that are perceived as self-evident goods or even evidence-based goods. Goods can be unpicked in very thought-provoking ways. So I'll put those both in the chat.
Thank you. Valentina, have you?
Yes, shall I quick go? Yeah, so aligning with the topic of today's webinar, I would suggest evidence-informed learning design as a book before my PhD thesis becomes a book. I don't have the luxury to mention that. And then the article I thought about is by the work done by the hybrid pedagogy team, which I find very interesting. And it was, let me just get the link, Instructional Designers Are Teachers. And it's all about the professional identity of designers. You know, they are looked at teachers of teachers and teachers of learners and teachers of the institution. So think a little bit more about our own role. So these are the two. I'm going to share the link in the chat.
Thank you. And Dave.
First off, these are awesome recommendations, by the way. Before I give my recommendation, I would recommend anything by the learning scientists. They're awesome. Tell Cindy I said
Yeah,
hi.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. Eva mentioned Mayer and Clark's book, E-Learning and the Science of Instruction, or multimedia. They're both kind of the same book. Those are amazing. I would probably say, for a general dip into the theory of instruction, there's The Psychology of Learning for Instruction by Marcy Driscoll, which is a bit of an older book, but she was kind of I guess a disciple is the wrong word, but it's the first one that comes to mind, of Robert Gagne. And she basically lays out, behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, connectivism, all of those things in these sections, and lays out the theory very simply for anyone to kind of as a jumping off point. So if you're not really familiar with the theory, it's a great book to have. You can look it up. You can kind of get the gist. There's lots of concept maps in there for you to really understand what these things are. She uses, Ozabel's kind of advanced organizers to help you learn this stuff. It's a really good example of how to write a book using instructional theory about instructional theory. The paper that I would recommend to anybody, who actually I think is like a must, is all the papers that John Sweller wrote on the development of cognitive load theory. You have to understand that stuff. It's so important, and it's such an exemplar of having the attitude that good science is self-correcting. So you'll read like seminal works from some Sweller on cognitive load theory, and then you'll read like, newer works from like a year ago. It was like, this didn't replicate, but this is what the non-replication shows us. And it helps you update your priors as much as possible in order to give good practice. Because I think a lot of the time we get held back by our own expertise, and we're guilty of many of the things that we, kind of accuse our stakeholders of not accepting new evidence and stuff like that. So I think those two things, that book and those papers, or that paper, are kind of like just great places to start so you can dig deeper.
I'm gonna we have to end this in just a sec. So Helen, your recommendations, and then we'll adjourn this.
Absolutely, super quick. So I would have gone with Mayer's multimedia as well. Funnily enough, I think that had a massive influence on me coming in from being an educator before. But I would say maybe learning engineering, a toolkit is quite interesting. And that idea of balancing evidence, I think just looking at that approach, I think is quite interesting actually. And anything by Sir Ken Robinson. Transformational pedagogy stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. It's really been I've really enjoyed chatting with everyone, and for all the really great comments. Yeah, I wish, as I think I've said before, like I feel like some of the comments, like a lot of the panelists could, or sorry, the audience could easily be in the panel and vice versa. So thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, and goodbye. Have a good night.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Yeah, it's great talking to everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much.
That's great. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.